Ask the delegates, please find your places. We will resume our session. Before we broke for lunch, we promised to give you a somewhat clearer rundown of the anticipated order sequence in which we'll deal with reports. We indicated at that time that we will begin with report from Advisory Committee 1A. We will be doing that. Also, we will be dealing with 1C, and we may be rearranging the sequence a little bit in those two Advisory Committee reports. But we will be dealing with 1A and C. Then we will go to 2B, 8B, 5, 6, 3. Somewhere in there, we're going to have a break. And prior to that break, at 3 o'clock, we will hear from the Faith Formation report. And that's a half-hour block, 2:30 to 3 o'clock. We'll hear from Faith Formation. So the sequence is 1A, 1C, 2B, 8B, 5, 6, 3, with a break partway through. Opening prayer. Andy DeCourt.
We started this morning in Ephesians chapter 1. Let's please join with me in prayer. God, we praise you for the ways that you have called us and that you work among us. We praise you in your glorious grace that you've poured out on us. We praise you for the work that we've been able to do this morning, and we seek your leading as we continue to go forward. We praise you in your glorious grace. We thank you for the ways in which you overcome our brokenness and the ways that you call us despite that. We praise you for all of the work of the different delegates and all the ways in which we can each bring a part of our brokenness and just a part of our unique characteristics and be brought together as one body in Christ for the praise of your glorious grace. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Okay, please get before you the documents from Advisory Committee 1A. We invite Alex to return to lead us in this conversation.
Advisory Committee 1A begins with point number 1, our dealing with the matters given to us by the Council of Delegates. Our first recommendation, C1, is that Synod thank retiring COD members or those completing service in 2019 for their faithful service and significant contributions to the denomination. And we so move.
Discussion on this recommendation, C1. Discussion on the recommendation. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. It's carried.
Do we want to do that now, that thanking, or is that it? That was it? Okay. Number 2, that Synod accept the invitation of Encounter Church in Grand Rapids, Michigan to serve as the convening church of Synod 2020 for the listed grounds, and we so move.
Recommendation is before you to approve Encounter Church as the convening church for Synod 2020. Discussion? All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. That is carried.
Recommendation 3, that Synod accept the invitation of First CRC in Orange City, Iowa, to serve as either the host or convening church of Synod 2021, and that Synod be held on the campus of Dordt University in Sioux Center, Iowa, for the listed grounds, and we so move.
Okay, that recommendation is before you. C3. Just note the ambiguity of the word to host or convene is dependent on subsequent action of this synod with regard to the Synod Review Task Force recommendation. So either as host or convening church, whichever it would be relevant at that time. Discussion to the motion. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. It's carried.
Recommendation number 4, that Synod adopt the changes to Church Order Articles 42 and 39 as proposed by Synod 2018, and we so move.
Recommendation is before you. Recommendation C4. Discussion on the motion. All in favor, please say aye. Opposed, same sign. That is carried.
Recommendation 5, that Synod express gratitude to Ms. Rita Bittendorp and Mr. Calvin Roseboom for their service to the Judicial Code Committee, and we so move.
Recommendation 5 is before you. Discussion on the motion. All in favor, please say aye. Opposed, same sign. That is carried. Your vote is that expression of appreciation.
Recommendation 6, that Synod take note of the COD's plans to develop a revised ministry plan, including listening sessions during national and binational gatherings in 2019, to gather input and to present a revised ministry plan to Synod 2020, and we so move.
Recommendation 6 is before us. Discussion. Those in favor, please say aye. Those opposed, same sign. That is carried. At this point, I'm going to ask that we skip over Section 2, Heritage Hall and Historical Committee mandate. It's logical to take that in conjunction with related Heritage Hall and Historical Committee mandate materials that are found in Advisory Committee 1C, to which we'll be turning as soon as we've completed this document. So we'll carry on with Section C, response to Overture 1 and 2, please.
Yes, point number 3 is response to Overtures 1 and 2, allow transfer of All Nations Church in Bakerfield, California, from Classis Greater Los Angeles to Classis Co-Am. The recommendation of the committee is that Synod accede. Recommendation 1 is that Synod accede to Overture 1 and 2 for the listed grounds, and we so move.
The recommendation is before you. Discussion on this motion. All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Those opposed, same sign. That is carried.
Recommendation 2 is that this be Synod's response to both Overtures 1 and 2, and we so move.
Discussion on recommendation 2. All in favor of this recommendation, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? That's carried.
Point number 4 is the response to Overtures 3 and 4 to approve transfer of Bethany Korean CRC, Burbank, California, from Classis Greater Los Angeles to Classis Han Mi. Recommendation 1 is that Synod accede to Overtures 3 and 4 for the listed grounds, and we so move.
Recommendation B1. Any discussion? All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. Carried.
Recommendation 2 is that this be Synod's response to both Overtures 3 and 4, and we so move.
Discussion on recommendation B2. All in favor, please say aye. Opposed, same sign. Carried.
Point number 5, response to Overture 5, to approve the formation of a new classis from congregations and ministries within Classis Pacific Northwest. Recommendation 1 of the committee is that Synod accede to Overture 5, creating a new classis to be called Classis Northern Cascades with the following member congregations: Envision Mission, Bellingham, Washington; Hope in Christ, Bellingham, Washington; The Table, Bellingham, Washington; First in Linden, Washington; Second in Linden, Washington; Third in Linden, Washington; Armor Vivente in Linden, Washington; Bethel in Linden, Washington; Mountain View in Linden, Washington; Sunlight in Linden, Washington; and Sumas in Sumas, Washington, for the listed grounds, and we so move.
Recommendation 5B1 is before you. We have a couple of speakers. Please approach the mic. Doug Fakema.
So I'm Doug Fakema from Classis Pacific Northwest, and those of us who are on the south end of the Whatcom-Skagit line have been dealing with some real sadness over this overture. It's been before our classes for 5 years, this issue, and we're still not sure whether to see this as a divorce or as releasing a colleague for a new ministry. Are we a Paul and Barnabas or a Yodica and Syntyche situation here? And we're still not sure. For 5 years I've been opposed to it, but I stand now voting in favor of this motion because I just personally don't see any benefit of telling those churches in Linden, we have the votes to keep you there. And so it's with, I hope, a sense of still a good relationship and being able to continue to work really well with our colleagues north of the Skagit-Whatcom line that we will release them to form a new classis.
Tom Wolters.
Tom Wolters, Classis Central Plains, speaking against this motion. I have not heard a great deal, but I have heard some concerns of people in that classis that the grounds that were presented are not the real reasons, and that it is a theological disagreement in conflict. And so I speak against the motion because it's not dealing with the real issues.
Michael Vanderlaan.
Michael Vanderlaan, Classis BC Southeast. Tom said 75% of what I was going to say. Because the grounds say it's about the size. I actually agree, the classis is way too big size-wise, but that means the line needs to change. You don't take 11 churches out of 35, you take half of 35, whatever that is, to make 2 new classes. To have the line only at 11 indicated other things, and we've already heard it's other things, so what's going on? So I can't in good faith vote for this.
Does the reporter wish to respond to either of the previous speakers? Don't need to, just you have the right if you wish to.
I can, I will say that those questions and issues were raised in our discussion, and just say that.
Okay. Aaron DeBoer.
Aaron DeVour, Classes Pacific Northwest. I will be pastoring in the new classis, if it is formed. I can speak to some of those things. I speak in favor of it. This has been a multi-year process, part of classis renewal. Several other types of multiplication of classes were suggested, as many as 4 classes coming out of that. The division numbers are almost 2 ahead of members and therefore ministry shares, and so that's the numeric relationship. The group of churches that will be forming this new classis are in no way monolithic. I heard snickers, as many are from Lyndon, Washington. Nonetheless, there's no monolithic theology or affinity even in Lyndon. And we've got a urban evangelist that will be in this classis. We've got a small church plant. We've got a rural context like myself in Sumas or Mountain View. We have great fellowship among each other. There is great diversity with all sorts of theological issues, including women in office. And so I speak in favor of this because this denomination has seen this sort of classes multiplication many times. In fact, it's been perfected right here in the zip code that we're in today. And so this has really been all within good order. After a couple of years and different proposals, this proposal carried with, I think, 70% of classes vote on that day, and in a very good spirit.
Thank you. Bram Cornelis.
Yeah, Brian Cornelis, Classis Minn Kota. I would speak in favor of the motion. We've heard only speculation about what the grounds might be, but the grounds are what they are in front of us. And I've spoken personally to multiple leaders in the proposed new classis, and they would directly contradict that speculation. And so I'm not sure that that kind of speculation would be admissible in terms of a reason to vote against the motion.
This concludes our list of speakers in the queue. Yeah. Dan?
Yeah, I served as chairperson of this committee, and we did discuss some of the things that we had heard more or less behind the scenes of some concerns and issues. But it seemed to us that the Classis Pacific Northwest had done its homework, that it was very clearly spelled out, and that on the basis of, as was mentioned, the recommendation and the grounds were very much in keeping with what would be, I think, appropriate for Synod to take into account. It is a very large class, it's very sprawled out, and we think it'll serve the church better. So the advisory committee was very comfortable recommending this beginning of a new classes.
Okay, that concludes our list of speakers. Judge that you are ready to vote. All those in favor of the recommendation, please say aye. Aye. Those opposed, same sign. That's carried.
Recommendation number 2 is that pending approval by Synod, that Synod instruct the executive director to appoint a neutral moderator as per point 1 of the appendix to Overture 5. And we so move.
Recommendation number 2 is before you. Any discussion? All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Those opposed, same sign. That's carried.
Point number 6 is the response to communication 1. That communication is found on page 537 of the agenda to Synod, and the recommendation is that Synod receive communication number 1 as information, and we so move.
Recommendation is before you. Any discussion on this recommendation? All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Those opposed, same sign. It's carried. Now we're going to move to document 1C and deal with item 1, Roman numeral 1, and then we will return to historical committee matters.
Point number 1 of report 1C is the rest of our material from the Council of Delegates. It is appearing momentarily. You want me to wait?
Yeah, no, just wait for a moment. We'll let that come up. For those of you who need to find it in your documents, we're looking at 1C, Roman numeral 1.
There we go. Point 1, as I said, is the rest of our material from the Council of Delegates regarding, well, our recommendation is that Synod receive the report from the COD Classis Renewal Advisory Team and that Synod not change the name of Classis. This response would fulfill the request of Synod 2018 to consider Overture 10 for the listed grounds, and we so move.
A motion is before you. Discussion to the motion. No speakers. All in favor of the motion, please say aye. Aye. Those opposed, same sign. That's carried. Now we return to document Advisory Committee 1A, Roman numeral 2, Heritage Hall and Historical Committee mandate. Privilege of the floor has been granted already previously in our voting for those who are listed under item B, privilege of the floor. And so we have a recommendation that is before us from the advisory committee. And we also have the representatives who are here on behalf of the historical committee, Dr. John Bolt and Dr. James DeYoung. Just need to explain a matter of proper procedure and protocol for a moment. The denomination has 3 standing committees, and the denomination at times appoints study committees and task forces. And when a report comes from either a standing committee or a study committee or a task force, it's evaluated and discussed by the advisory committee of Synod, and if there is a substantial difference of opinion and a difference of recommendation that arises from that, according to our rules of procedure, the precedence of consideration then goes by default to the standing committee or the study committee or task force. And at that point, the recommendation from the advisory committee becomes a matter of for information and can potentially become the motion on the floor, but that requires a certain action by Synod. So at this point, we need to ask our standing committee, the historical committee, whether in their opinion there is here a substantial difference between their recommendation and the recommendation of the advisory committee. Dr. Bolt, you're okay. So there is a declared significant difference in the recommendation. That means that in terms of the sequence of presentation and the precedence of presentation, Dr. Bolt has the privilege then to put before us the recommendation from his committee that he represents, the Historical Committee. The way that works is that recommendation will be brought before us. It will be the recommendation that is legally before us. But after that recommendation is on the table, on the floor, it will actually be tabled for the purpose of going to the advisory committee's recommendation for information. Upon that recommendation being given to us for information, we will return to the recommendation of the Historical Committee. That will be the motion before us. If at some point one of the delegates feels that there has been sufficient conversation and discussion with regard to that motion, and it's your wish to return to the motion of the advisory committee, at that time it is in order to ask for a recommendation to table the motion of the Historical Committee in order to go to the motion from the advisory committee. It's just laying out the rules by which we play. Is that clear? Okay. So, Dr. Bolt, we invite you to come forward and present the recommendation of the Historical Committee. That material is found in the supplementary material to Synod.
Mr. President, with your permission, I'd like to read a prepared statement that gives the case for the Historical Committee's recommendation.
Please proceed.
Thank you. Mr. President, delegates, the Historical Committee of the Christian Reformed Church finds itself in the uncomfortable, but sadly not unfamiliar, position of opposing a proposal approved by the Joint Library Committee of Calvin College and Calvin Seminary unanimously, and then also unanimously by the faculties and boards of both institutions. And now we face Synod to oppose the recommendation of an advisory committee. We are perfectly aware of the odds against us. And that brings me to two related questions that we've been asked numerous times, and we need to air them here because they are also undoubtedly on the minds of every delegate. Number one, and this is the question that we have also asked ourselves, why are you so persistent, or less kindly, stubborn, in your opposition when the whole world seems to disagree with you? And two, really now, what difference does it make? The first question is easy to answer. We hold the mandate given to us as a committee to protect the integrity and well-being of Heritage Hall and to preserve its educational mission as a sacred trust. Thus, as it became apparent to us that there was a movement toward turning over the management of Heritage Hall back to the Heckman Library, we judged that this would likely compromise especially the second educational part of our mandate, which is to cultivate in the Christian Reformed Church knowledge of and appreciation for our church's history. To be faithful to our trust, we had no choice but to protest. And we need to impress upon the delegates of Synod that we are in fact not alone. in our stance, but surrounded by a significant cloud of witnesses. To clarify that point, and this seems appropriate here, we have to take a quick look at the history of Heritage Hall. In 1969, the denomination's archivist and the director of the college and seminary library were the same person, Dr. Lester DeCoster. The archives were part of the library. In addition, two of the Christian Reformed Church's most respected historians, Dr. William Spoolhoff and Dr. John Crumminga, were presidents of Calvin College and Calvin Seminary, respectively. A joint historical resources committee, not a library committee, oversaw the affairs of Heritage Hall. Under Dr. DeCoster's leadership, supported by the two presidents, the three divested themselves and their offices of any control and management of Heritage Hall. The Historical Resources Committee was discontinued after 1969, and they persuaded Synod to separate Heritage Hall from the library and give it its own distinct identity. Why? Because they were convinced that more needed to be done than simply collect and catalog material, but that these materials need to be, in Dr. DeCoster's words, systematically exploited for the benefit of the church. And in Dr. DeCoster's own words, the church's understanding of what was needed was for the denomination's archivist not to be a librarian, as he was, but to be someone with historical skills and passion, particularly historical knowledge of the Christian Reformed Church and its 19th century colonial origins. And for that, they believed that a distinct identity, which eventually became known as Heritage Hall, was needed. They persuaded Synod to make the separation and to give the supervision of Heritage Hall over to the denominational historical committee. This vision for a distinct identity of Heritage Hall being essential to its educational mission has been shared by historians with a special expertise in CRC history and the 19th century from 1969 right to the present day. That is why we say we're not alone. On the contrary, there is a clear consensus among professionals in the field, shared with us again last week by the attendees of the Association for the Advancement of Dutch American Studies at its conference on this campus over at the Print Center. We're told repeatedly that turning the research and educational activities of an archive over to a library management diminishes and seriously jeopardizes its educational mission. And the clearest example that is close to us is what happened at the Free University of Amsterdam when an established and having gained an international reputation, the Historical Documentation Center of Dutch Protestantism from 1800 to the present was brought into the library, and its director, Dr. George Haring, was released from his task. That is why, when it became clear to us that there was a movement to also again return Heritage Hall to library management, we began to receive unsolicited letters and emails, such as the one we received from the staff of the Minolta Institute in Holland, Michigan, including the Dean of Dutch American Immigration Histories, Dr. Robert Swieringa. These were letters protesting against the move. We do not stand alone, and that is why we object. We consider it somewhat disingenuous to have all of this come before Synod as simply a proposal for restructuring the management of the Heckman Library of Calvin College and Seminary. It is that, of course. But it is also a not entirely upfront and obvious attempt to reverse the decision of 1969 that separated Heritage Hall from library management. What troubles us as a committee is that the proposal that is before you from the two institutions does not even acknowledge that change, much less address it, and provides no guarantee or strategies to protect Heritage Hall's important educational mission. That's the difference it makes, and that is why we object. Mr. President, we respect Synod's authority and the work of its advisory committees. We particularly appreciate the careful listening given to us by the Advisory Committee A, and especially because their listening is reflected in the recommendation concerning the Council of Delegates. Now, Synod decides against us. We would, yes, be disappointed. But we're well acquainted with disappointment on this score, and we've survived. We only ask that Synod make an informed decision on the matter and be aware clearly of what is at stake. If Synod adopts the proposal submitted by the boards of Calvin College and Calvin Seminary, it reverses the decision of 1969. It rejects the wisdom of the three giants I mentioned earlier, ignores the overwhelming consensus of professional historians in the field, and yes, repudiates the work of its own standing committee. And therefore, on behalf of the Historic Committee, we ask the delegates this question. Do you think that you have sufficient information in order to make that momentous decision? And if not, might it not be the better part of wisdom to to adopt the recommendation of our committee in our supplementary report, namely, withhold final judgment except for the matter of the advisory council, refer it back to us for working out a memorandum of understanding between the Historical Committee, Heritage Hall, and the three funding agencies to the mutual satisfaction of all concerned parties. Thanks to the wisdom of our advisory committee, the Historical Committee is very amenable to asking the Council of Delegates to adjudicate any differences that could not be settled. But such an appeal should not be made until all efforts have been made to settle those differences at a lower level, and that is in our committee's work. Mr. President, thank you for allowing me this time. I hope that this has brought greater clarity to what is at stake, and the delegates have a better idea of the difference it makes. And maybe, I've also given you at least a glimpse into why we have been, admittedly, stubborn on the matter. Thank you.
Thank you, John. That brings us to the formal recommendation. And the formal recommendation was printed. There are actually two recommendations. They were printed in the supplementary material, very close to the end of your supplementary package on page 3 of the information from the Historical Committee supplement. Do you have those? They're on the screen?
It's up on the screen.
Okay, they're up on the screen. And you may read them both.
Okay.
And then the first, you don't need to read the grounds, but you read the recommendations, both of them, and then the first recommendation will be moved and seconded, and then it will be immediately tabled. We will have no discussion on it. It will be tabled so that we can move for information to the advisory committee, and the advisory committee's recommendation will be read, and then we will return to this motion on the floor, which is recommendation A.
Our recommendation is that Synod approve the establishment of an advisory council for Heritage Hall to give counsel and advice to the curator and staff of Heritage Hall on matters of vision, personnel, finances, strategic planning, and programming. The advisory council will report to the Historical Committee, the executive director of the CRC&A, and the administrations of Calvin College and Calvin Theological Seminary. The Historical Committee remains responsible for reporting to Synod on Heritage Hall and the archives. Recommendation 2, that Synod approve no additional changes in the governance of Heritage Hall and the archives.
Thank you. So recommendation A is legally before us and now will be tabled in order to move to advisory committee recommendation.
After listening to delegates or representatives from the Historical Committee, as well as speaking with Steve Timmermans in his role as Executive Director and Jewel Maidenblick in his capacity as Seminary President, the committee came up with recommendation C1, that Synod endorse the recommended change to library governance as found in the appendix to the Calvin College supplement, with underline indicating new text and strike through indicating deleted text for the listed grounds. I will also note that Steve Timmermans did excuse himself from our deliberations on this motion.
Thank you. With that, we return to the motion that's on the floor and open that motion for discussion. The motion that's on the floor is recommendation A from the Historical Committee, that Synod approve the establishment of an advisory council for Heritage Hall. First speaker, Julius Maidenblick.
Mr. President, maybe it would be helpful even at this point to say that I'm no giant, but I do want to stand in affirmation of the work and ministry of John Bolt and Jim DeYoung. And as evidence of that, John Bolt recently helped with others to Reformed Ethics. Volume 1 is out. I have a copy. And because I want to start with work of appreciation.
You're giving the copy away? I'll claim it.
Yeah, that's right. John might have some extra ones. I love history. And I had the privilege of speaking to the advisory committee. Michael Laroy was at another committee, and he is also willing to speak before this committee if needed, before this synod. I asked in light of that, I might be speaking, if we could actually put up the actual mandate from 1969, because that might clarify, at least for us, some of what we're dealing with.
Have you submitted that to the?
I did not. I apologize for that. I did talk to the executive director about that.
Okay. It's in the archives.
It is in the archives. and it is an appendix. It's in the supplemental material.
Okay.
And for those of you who are getting the supplemental material, it looks like the Axis Synod like this. It has wonderful statements like in terms of we want to make sure our microfiche is up to speed on all this. And it also references how we really began. In 1934, there was concern that we were losing data. We were losing stories. We're losing records. And as a result, in 1934, Synod then considered the advisably appointing a permanent committee with a mandate to gather and preserve books and documents of historical value pertaining to the history of our church and the church from which it originated, and to religion in general. They were very broad. And to provide room and facilities in the college or seminary building where they may be properly preserved and displayed. So it was just about getting the materials and making sure there was a room for them. And so the materials began piling up. And in 1969, which is where, once again, we've been referencing, the mandate of the Historical Committee is, they said that was too broad, let's focus that particular mandate. And so that mandate then speaks about that the mandate of the committee shall be altered to read, shall gather, preserve, and supervise the official archives of the Christian Reformed Church and cultivate in the Christian Reformed Church knowledge of and appreciation for the church's history. A rather broad mandate. It's 50 years old, and we continue once again to appreciate the work of history and those who deal with this material. Now, I can tell you, as now president starting my 9th year, this kind of marks that time, that I do, as well as the college president, we appreciate the work that's there. But let's be clear. If you desire to look at the archives of the Christian Reformed Church, you walk in to the library, Heckman Library of Calvin College and Calvin Seminary. It's your library, by the way. You walk in and you walk into the walk into Heritage Hall. Beautiful area, and that also is located within the Heckman Library. And then you can go and obtain and look at the archives of the Christian Reformed Church, but there are other archives present there, not just of the CRCNA, but also of Calvin College, Calvin Seminary, and others. Many of you might know of Paul Henry, that name, for example. The archives of Paul Henry and his work as a Calvin College professor, as a political scientist, are also within the archive, within Heritage Hall as part of the overall archives. There's a lot of good work there, and there's a lot of good material there. But in 2019, we're not dealing with microfiche. We're dealing with how we network this material and make it available. And our desire is to clarify how that work really gets done with a curator. So now I'll lean back and get the rest of that. As you look at the material, and once again, you're going to look at it related to underline and the like, but really we want to clarify that when the curator of Heritage Hall, and we appreciate the work of Dick Harms, for example, that many of you would reference, but in terms of finding a person who now fits into this role, here's a couple key questions. Does that person work within the library and work with connecting with the library and the library staff? And is that person working with so that that person will answer emails from, say, the dean of the library? A dean of the library of, once again, of the library of Calvin College and Calvin Seminary, which is your college and your seminary. So our desire is to, in this material, to have done two things. One is clarify, yes, that curator works with the library, clearly, directly, for this new age, 2019. So that it's no longer materials in a box, but it's things that can be networked and shared and developed, and so those stories get shared. For example, we have a need to tell our story even more broadly and directly. If we think of what Paul DeReese referenced the other day, instead of having smaller angled stories, we need that obtuse. So who is the first person, for example, I wonder, who came from Korea to study at Calvin Theological Seminary? Who's the first woman who gained a degree from Calvin Theological Seminary? Who's the first person and we can list another area, a group of people, and say, let's develop those stories. So we all want more of those stories. In our conclusion, and I say our because it wasn't just myself, it wasn't just President Laroy, there was a number of us as we developed this material and had these questions and did along the way consult with, and once again, I know they might not think that we heard entirely, but in different ways, we've had meetings where we said we really do believe this should be a person, the curator should be working with the library, under the administration of the dean of the library, and also let's have this advisory council, which we do agree on, that's broader in scope, that helps us understand those stories. And so just to clarify, what you have before you is a proposal that was developed with the Joint Library Committee. The Joint Library Committee did have members of the Historical Committee present, and they discussed their views in that moment. The Joint Library Committee of Heckman Library then said yes to the proposal unanimously, sent it then to the respective faculties of the college and the seminary, and also that then went as a recommendation to both boards and now has come to the advisory committee. We appreciate the work of the 4 people who are in the historical committee, 2 of which are going, by the way, moving off that committee. And we would suggest that nothing we have done actually changes anything about that mandate. It does clarify how we fulfill the work of the curator and how that work is connected to, once again, the library and to what we do at Calvin College and Seminary, along with you, because the advisory council involves all of us together. So as you read the grounds, which I know is not necessary because you all have read the grounds, but I really do hope you just go through the grounds as a way of, once again, asking yourself how we weigh this for us today in 2019. Because we want to fulfill what the church desired in 1934. We want to fulfill what was desired in 1969. So I would beg to differ with my esteemed colleague, John Bolt. This is not a reversal of 1969. This is not a reversal of 69. This is the way how we're going to live it out in 2019.
Thank you, President Maidenblick. Next speaker, Mark.
Mr. President, just should I respond to a speaker who touches the previous one, or do I wait till they've all spoken? What is your pleasure?
Let's give a couple of people the opportunity to speak. And,
Absolutely.
we certainly will not move away from this topic until you've had the privilege of response. Mark?
You don't want to try my last name?
Eitenbogaert.
As a member of the committee, I heard Mark Eitenbogaert,
Well done.
Classis Ileana, and I am speaking against the motion from the historical committee, which, to correct the situation, is actually what is before us at this point. He had referenced something previously that they had a recommendation. To give a little better background of what has actually been presented to our committee was 2 recommendations, one from the college, Calvin College, and one from the seminary, and then a recommendation from the historical committee in opposition to parts of that. The recommendation from the 2 college and seminary is not directly represented because they don't have committee standing. Our recommendation incorporated a lot of that information. However, we did feel that there were some concerns that were valid by the historical committee, and that is why we made a few changes to it to ensure that the work of the historical committee did continue. I think that that would be a better way for this to happen, and I think that the impression is that the reconciliation between the 2 may not actually happen all that well without some kind of moderation of the situation, which is also why we place that in our recommendation. So I would speak against the current recommendation on the floor because of those reasons. We feel that we have combined the 3 in a better way with the hopefully future considered recommendation of the committee.
Mr. President, could I just ask for clarification? Are you saying that the advisory committee changed things in the proposal itself?
The advisory committee, in their recommendation, one of the things that we were very intentional about considering was the recommendation to continue the work of the historical committee. That is number 3, if you have yours in front of you, but that's actually not on the table at this point. But it does specifically say we want the work of the historical committee to continue. And it is our understanding that the structuring is more of an HR situation, that we really didn't know who this curator reported to, and we wanted to put it in writing. And that's how it was explained to us, and we would hope that the hearts of the men who represent all these people are true in what they're claiming. And I would not want to assume that they would misrepresent the situation to us.
Thank you, Mark. Next speaker is Dr. Michael Laroy.
Mr. President, I thank you for giving me an opportunity and voice on the floor for this matter. I want to explain on behalf of the college how pleased we are, how excited we are actually in an ongoing way to continue to collaborate with the denomination and with the seminary for the purposes of furthering a historical education and understanding of the denomination itself. We're pleased to do that. We actually believe that this proposed form of organization and this collaboration between 3 entities allows a great deal more to be accomplished than can be accomplished by any one standing on its own. And for this purpose, we submit the proposal that we hope will clarify some organizational issues which did produce HR problems and issues. The fact is, in this organization, that 40% of this entity is funded by the CRCNA, 20% is funded by Calvin Theological Seminary, and 40% is funded by a Calvin college. So we use those resources to accomplish a great deal more than we could accomplish on our own. We hope to continue to collaborate well to meet the mission of Heritage Hall. And I would disagree with the speaker that proposed concern about the ability to advance historical education when the other 2 participating entities and partners have explicitly in their mission the advancement of education on any number of fronts, including the history of the denomination and the history of the significant contributors to the advancement of Reformed faith in North America. I want to illustrate some of the problems associated with a lack of clear management structure without getting into any details related to specific personnel. Problems that were noted and identified and were seeking to be addressed were things like artifacts not properly archived, best practices not currently being used in place, a lot of outdated technology that was limiting the access of those resources to wider audiences. Let me see, I'm trying to read my writing without my glasses, forgive me here. Well, let me just leave it there, that we do believe that this is a better way forward, and we are committed to trying to collaborate and work well with the historical committee and with the denomination to this end. I am significantly concerned that if we continue with the current organizational model, we may compound the problems which I believe would limit the ability of the denomination to achieve its objectives. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Laroy. At this point, I see no further speakers on the speaker queue. So just to be clear, the motion that is before us is the motion that was printed in the supplementary material. Yep. That's correct. The question was asked as a point of order, or point of clarification, if this vote votes down the recommendation, do we automatically revert back to the recommendation of the advisory committee? And I said, yes, that's correct.
Mr. President, I assume that refers to recommendation B rather than 1, because our recommendation 1 is also part of the proposal. But if there is no other speaker, Mr. President, may I respond a moment to, especially to Reverend Maidenblick's comments and also Dr. Laroy's?
You may, and then we do have one additional speaker.
Oh, well, I'm okay with having another person go first.
You may respond.
All the wonderful things that President Maidenblick mentioned are things we support. We too want an upgrade of the technology. We want better record keeping. The problem with a slowdown of digitalization and record keeping is not because the historical committee is somehow opposed to it, but because when the position of a new digital archivist came up, 2 of the 3 funding agencies approved and the third one did not, and the position was not filled. Mr. President, there is a change. Because in addition to the Advisory Council for Heritage Hall, this Advisory Council, and therefore also the curator, report to the Joint Library Committee of the college and seminary in this structure. So now, a structure that exists now where you have a curator of Heritage Hall who's relatively independent and has historically reported to different people in the Calvin College administration on matters of HR matters of personnel management, including different vice presidents, different deans, as well as the chief of the librarian, is now going to be not just reporting on HR matters, as was commented upon, but now is going to be under the direct management of the dean of the Heckman Library. And I'm going to be very frank with you that there isn't a professional historian who would be willing to come as a curator for Heritage Hall, knowing that he's going to be treated at and expected to be basically a member of the library staff rather than a professional recognized historian. I'm not saying this on my own. I'm just repeating what we've heard over and over and over again from professional historians. We have no objection to a personnel supervisory relationship with either the dean of the Heckman Library or someone else, although it is a little odd that if the dean of the Heckman Library is ex officio a matter of the advisory council, that then this council reports to a library committee under the direction of the dean of the Heckman Library. So rather than clarifying the organizational structure, because already now, and throughout the tenures of Dr. Herbert Brinks and Richard Harms, personnel matters were handled by the college administration. And we as committee have never, ever given any indication that we think that's our job. So I'm still perplexed. If we had been able to sit down with the 3 executives and simply talk together about these small little details, we might have been able to work them out. But instead, we as a committee too, were simply given a proposal to accept or not. And we think all the goals of modernization and digitalization and better cataloging and all of that need to be done. We just don't think that we have to change the character of Heritage Hall by making it simply a department of the library.
See Dr. DeYoung edging toward the podium as well. Dr. DeYoung.
Thank you, Mr. President. I have good news and I had bad news, okay? And the good news is that as an educator, you always take great delight and pleasure when one of your students excels you in their attainments. And you've excelled me in two ways. I have aspired my whole life to be the pastor of an organized church, and I never made it. David never built the temple. He left it to Solomon. I never made it to be a pastor. And the second thing in which you have excelled me is the fact that you are president of Synod. That's something to which I will never aspire. So may I congratulate you, come and shake your hand?
Yeah, you may. I know what's coming.
Congratulations. You can explain that.
I will. I expected something like this, although I wish it had a Toronto Maple Leafs instead of a Florida Panthers emblem. In 1984, when I graduated with my MDiv degree, President DeYoung was president of Calvin Seminary, and I had had him as a teacher at Dordt College previously. Dordt College had a long history where the graduating class would present a present of some sort to the president of the college. So, as a gesture of humor, because we had a newly formed hockey team at Calvin Seminary, and we played in the intramural league, and we were victorious that year. I claimed the puck from the winning goal and set it aside. And at graduation ceremony, I secretly slipped it to Dr. DeYoung. That was easy for me to do because I was wearing a suit and I had a pocket that I could put it in. But with his gown, he wondered what in the world he would do with it. So he whispered to me and he said, "I think I'm just going to drop the puck." And I said, "Game on." And then he kind of looked at me and said, "Well, what do I do with it?" And I said, "That's your problem, not mine." And everyone wondered, of course, what's going on on stage. And so when all of the certificates had been handed out, he held up the puck. And then he very wisely said, "But what I really needed was a stick."
I want you to know that one's a collector's item.
Thank you.
That was given to me by Wayne Huizinga when he established the Florida Marlins as the hockey team down there. So you treasure that. It's probably going to be worth something in a few years.
I trust our paths will still cross a number of times, and there may still be an opportunity for me to pass the puck once more.
All right, that's the good news, okay. Bill. That's the good news.
All right.
Back to business. One of the things I would simply like to emphasize, in addition to the points that John made in his presentation, is the fact that one of the deep concerns that we have as a historical committee and our colleagues in Europe and in Holland, Michigan have, is that Heritage Hall in the vision of John Crumminga and Bill Spoolhoff and Hank Zwanstra and Herb Brinks and Henry Ippel, all who constituted the original Historical Resources Committee, was to give Heritage Hall, or colonial origins and what eventually became Heritage Hall, a distinct identity that would be recognizable and appreciated, and which could be a building block to dissemination of our great legacy and our heritage. Subsequently, that's exactly what happened with the Meter Center. The Meter Center and Heritage Hall, as I have said to Dr. Laroy, are two of the very best things that we have going on this campus. They are the two entities that can distinguish us and the rich treasure and legacy that we have more than just about anything else that we've got going on this campus. And what the Historical Committee and our colleagues elsewhere are concerned about is that if the Heritage Hall reverts to simply becoming a department of the library, we're going to lose that opportunity. We wouldn't want that for the Meter Center. We don't want that for the Heritage Hall. And in the collective wisdom of 3 college administrations and 3 seminary administrations subsequently, the library has been construed as an entity alongside Heritage Hall and the Meter Center. And the organizational document of the library specifies that separate but collaborative relationship between those 3 entities. And we think that as a heritage committee, as a historical committee, that by preserving and protecting that entity, we can give broader influence and significance and outreach to the rich legacy that we have in Heritage Hall. Now, the moon isn't going to go out of its orbit, depending on what is decided here this afternoon, but there are some significant things at stake, and we just asked you to weigh this carefully, and I think there's real wisdom from an organizational and a personnel perspective to refer this back so that we can work out as a historical committee with the Council of Delegates a mutually agreeable and understandable relationship that serves everyone in the best interest. That's what I would plead for this afternoon, Bill.
Okay, thank you, Dr. DeYoung. Next speaker on our queue is Melissa Van Dyke. Melissa?
Thank you, Mr. President. I'd like to move to table the motion from the Historical Committee and move back to the advisory committees.
Okay, there is a motion that is made to table the recommendation from the Historical Committee and move back to the Advisory Committee. That is supported. We will put that to a vote. All in favor of tabling the motion that's before us in order to revert to the Advisory Committee, please say aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. Aye. That carried. It is 2:30, and we have a presentation that will be made by Faith Formation. So I'm going to suggest that we hold that motion to return to the Advisory Committee until after we've had the presentation by Faith Formation. Actually, that's not a bad thing. That gives you a little bit of time to think about it and so on. And so we're going to invite Faith Formation to come and do their presentation. And I think they're even buying coffee.
Mr. President, just a point of clarification.
Yep.
The current queue, speaker queue, if we were to untable it again, would that be preserved?
No. Yeah? Oh, sorry, yes. You can do that. Yeah. Right, so the queue, if your name was on that queue before, that's valid if we go back to the previous motion. But it's not valid for this motion, right? So we will start a new queue. Okay. That's it. Dr. Hielema.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And thank you for the privilege of telling you a little bit about Faith Formation Ministries. We've been reflecting on history, and our history is 4 years old. We were born at the Synod of 2015 at Dordt College in the B.J. Hahn Auditorium 4 years ago, and we're delighted to give you a little update concerning our ministry this afternoon, and we're also delighted to invite you to the snack break at 3 o'clock. I've been the team lead. I am the outgoing team leader of Faith Formation Ministries, and beside me is Christine Decker, our administrative coordinator. Our team of 16, mostly part-time people, are spread all over the U.S. and Canada. We have a couple with us this afternoon, a bunch of wave. Sandy Swartzentruber and Laura Keeley. Sandy is our resource coordinator, and Laura is our regional catalyzer for Michigan. We're first going to briefly tell you the story of Faith Formation Ministries in 22 words. And you will find most of these words on a bookmark in your folder. Word number 1, covenant. Faith Formation Ministries launched in 2015, but the seeds of our birth were planted actually at Synod 2006. A minority report at that Synod recommended that all baptized children be welcomed to the communion table, and that minority report was adopted. Beneath that vote lay very complex dynamics, but among other things, that vote affirmed that we hold our children dear and take our covenant theology seriously.
2, shepherding. Synod 2007 was required to ratify this decision. Instead, it made the unusual decision to appoint a 5-year Faith Formation Committee to discern the wisest ways to shepherd the denomination concerning its children at the table practices.
Word number 3, posture. Why was a shepherding committee appointed instead of a study committee? The Faith Formation Committee, which I served on, certainly was mandated to study the issue, but its central task was to listen to churches and converse around the topic of children and communion and faith formation in general. The mandate to serve as a shepherd to the denomination was a major shift in posture, a posture that became foundational for us at Faith Formation Ministries and our mandate to serve the local church.
Word number 4, local church. This posture shift was rooted in the New Testament declaration that Jesus lives in the church, where 2 or 3 are gathered in his name. On the island of Patmos, John saw Jesus walking among the 7 candlesticks, just as he walks among our local churches today.
Word number 5, denomination. A shepherding posture reshapes the relationship between the denomination and its local churches. We as a denomination are a servant who prioritizes honoring the presence of Jesus in the local church.
6, Christ formation. Faith formation is actually Christ formation. Paul tells the Galatians that he is in the pains of childbirth until Christ is formed in you. Honoring the presence of Jesus in the local church puts us all in the pains of childbirth as we seek to further the formation of Christ in our congregations in order to bless the world.
Word number 7, respectful listening. Almost every single New Testament epistle begins by naming the specific ways in which Jesus lives in that local church. That's where it all starts. How is Jesus walking among each of our congregations today? Respectful listening is the first step toward discerning the character of his presence.
Number 8, no cloning. The presence of Jesus in every Christian Reformed congregation is unique. His majesty is so vast, so high and long and deep, that it is never embodied in exactly the same way in two places. Our calling at FFM is to honor that uniqueness.
Which leads to number 9, church culture. Breathe deep, inhale, and you will inhale the ways that Jesus is present in the church and the ways that he is not yet present. That's the church culture. One of our chief callings as congregational leaders is to be shepherds of our congregation's culture. The ways in which the entire body experiences the presence of Jesus. Our FFM team has developed a variety of resources for helping church leaders shepherd their church's culture.
Number 10, experimentation. Reformed theology acknowledges the tension between the already and the not yet. The motto, reformed and always reforming, puts that tension into practice. Thus, our congregational ministries always have an experimental dimension. FFM seeks to build capacity for holy experimentation.
Which also includes number 12, intentionality. Sometimes we're tempted in our churches to operate on a kind of automatic pilot. Biblical teachings about faith formation remind us that we're called to be continually reflective, examining our assumptions and our practices, and with greater clarity of purpose, refining and refreshing all that we do as the Spirit leads us.
Number 12, worship, prayer, programming, service. Much of what we do at church fits under the categories of worship, prayer, programming, and service. Each of these is like a container in which Christ formation takes place. As Paul says, let the word of Christ dwell in you richly, as you teach and admonish one another with all wisdom, and sing psalms, hymns, and spiritual songs with gratitude in your hearts to God. We're thankful that our FFF team can partner with worship ministries in this good work.
Word number 13, practices. In Colossians 3 that Christine just read, Paul reminds us that Christ formation takes place as we engage in practices. The ones he names are teaching, admonishing, and singing. The purpose of these practices is to strengthen the Spirit's presence within us, equipping us to be a blessing. We at FFM use a practice-based approach to assisting congregations with strengthening faith formation.
14, hundreds of practices. Paul continues, whatever you do, whether in word or in deed, do it all in the name of the Lord Jesus. There are hundreds of practices that invite Christ formation. Our conversations, the way we watch the news, enjoying God's creation, generous giving, and responding to the Lord's call to serve as ambassadors of reconciliation.
A specific practice, word 15, sharing faith stories or testimonies. In our short 4 years, we have learned that very many Christian Reformed congregations want to be better equipped to engage in the practice of faith storytelling and giving testimonies. They are finding as they take little steps in that direction, they are growing closer together as a church community, and they are becoming more aware of how Christ is being formed within them.
Number 16, intergenerational church. Church programming often segregates us by age group. FFM is learning that many congregations are eager to bring different age groups together. They are doing this in many different ways. on worship teams, through mentoring, through service projects, through sharing life stories, and during shared meals. Especially beautiful moments happen when our seniors and our youth are brought together in meaningful ways.
Number 17, giving shape to a young ministry. How does a denominational ministry honor the uniquenesses of every congregation and encourage stronger practices of Christ formation throughout an intergenerational church? At Faith Formation Ministries, we respond to this question by talking about the right hand of curating, creating, and sharing resources, and working together with the left hand of building relationships with church leaders so that these two hands working together encourage faith formation.
And number 18, menu-based resourcing. FFM's website includes hundreds of faith formation ideas and practices organized by topic. Many of these ideas have arisen from CRC churches themselves. To help churches find the right resource for their context, we encourage them to
phone a friend. Word number 19. We have a team of experienced regional catalyzers who are committed to listening to your church's stories, talking about next steps, and sharing resources. We have connected with hundreds of church leaders in our 4 years in all kinds of ways through workshops, classes, meetings, coffee visits, phone calls, emails, Skype meetings, and many more.
Number 20, adaptation. The wondrous richness of Christ formation means that every faith formation idea we explore with a congregation needs to be adapted for its specific context. Adaptation builds more capacity for congregational leaders to discern the next faithful, simple step of encouraging Christ formation.
21, what's trending? Together with many other ministries, we at FFM are discerning denomination-wide patterns. We've noticed that more and more CRC congregations are using the building blocks of faith as a guide for identifying their next faithful steps in their own church. More and more CRC congregations are recognizing the need to equip families for sturdier faith formation in the home. More and more CRC congregations are longing for stronger ways to walk with young adults. More and more CRC congregations are noticing that our reformed DNA of doing easily leads to burnout. And we're seeing a greater eagerness to grow in wise Sabbath-keeping practices.
And 22, Missio Dei. Christ is formed in us, that we may be a blessing to God's beloved and broken world. Christ is formed in us as all ages walk together as sisters and brothers, sharing in God's calling. Christ is formed in us as we embody hospitality that points to the community of every tribe and language and people and nation gathered in the presence of the Lamb. We at Faith Formation Ministries are very thankful that Christian Reformed churches have invited us to take shape as a new ministry and enjoy the privilege of walking alongside thousands of church leaders in the calling of Christ formation.
Now that you've heard our short history, we're going to ask you to participate in it for just a couple of minutes. 20 years ago, I was at a conference, and the speaker said, "How true is this of you? I'm too busy doing God's work for God to do his work in me." And one thing we've heard from churches is they say to us, "Help us as leaders reflect on our own faith formation being formed towards Christ, that we might be more equipped to carry out our calling as leaders." So just for a couple of minutes, I'm going to invite you to do that very thing. Will you take about a minute of silence and just think, what is a scripture verse or passage that has played a significant role in your own walk with God? And why has this and does this continue to be so important for you? Think about it for 1 minute. All right, next, would you identify one elbow partner? If we can keep the hockey theme going here. And for 90 seconds each, compare notes with your elbow partner as to what scripture came to mind and why it was important. Go for it. Okay, the second elbow partner should be talking by now. Okay, we have 15 seconds to finish up here, and then the rest will have to happen during the coffee hour. Okay, please put a bookmark in your sentence. Note where you ended. And make a plan to continue that conversation in about 10 or 12 minutes when we have a break. So it's a little bit ironic and perhaps even contradictory that a ministry that prioritizes the local church is talking about itself. And we also had to write our own self-evaluation, which you've noticed in the agenda for Synod. And given the fact that we are servants of the local church, we've invited 6 delegates who are here to, for about 45 seconds each, just tell a glimpse of how FFM has walked with them and their congregation. They'll introduce themselves. They are Neil, Laura, Ron, Julius, Lori, and Bob. And thank you for helping us. And Neil, it's all yours.
Is it on? There we go. So I'm Neil DeConing. I'm the pastor at the Woody Nook Christian Reformed Church in the county of Lacombe, Alberta. We wanted to, at one point, we've used this stuff in a number of different ways. We've used it in elders, we've used it, the material in a number of other circumstances too, children at communion. But one of the things we did about a year and a half ago was to ask ourselves the question, how do parents encourage their children to walk in faith by word and deed? And we had a number of sessions with being led by people who were in the age group, and they had chats together about their children, about faith and faith formation. And it was a very, very productive time from what my children tell me. And some of that material is here with us, and it's been very useful for us as a congregation.
I'm Laura DeYoung. I'm the pastor of Second CRC in Grand Haven. And because of work we had already done with FFM, our adult ministries team decided to spend this next year looking at storytelling and testimonies. And in one of our meetings, we just Googled storytelling faith resources, and the very first hit was the toolkit from FFM with dozens and dozens of resources for faith storytelling in your churches. And so without us even asking for their help, they were encouraging and affirming and supporting us in the work that we were doing.
I'm Ron Hosmer. I'm a delegate for Eastern Canada and a commissioned pastor of youth and congregational life at Calvin Christian Reformed Church in Ottawa. I'm part of Faith Formation's Youth Champion Network. We get together as champions by video conferencing several times a year and gather physically together once a year. I value those conference calls and face-to-face gatherings because I learn that I am not doing the challenging calling of youth ministry in isolation. I learn from others about ways to minister to the churches in my classes, as well as my own church. There's lots of synergy and energy in these times, and I come away energized and able to continue my work as pastor and champion. I was part of the founding group several years ago that consisted of just a few classes in Ontario, and I've watched our classes champion grow to over 30 classes in Canada and the United States. I value this connection to the broader church, and I'm thankful to be a part of it.
My name is Julius Sumawing. I'm one of the pastors at Bethel Christian Reformed Church in Sun Valley, California. Through FFM's presentation by your tireless regional catalyzer, Ron Chu, in our classes meeting, our small church has been made aware of available resources from these various faith formation toolkits. Two, we have accessed thus far, and have found educational and encouraging. One is the Children's Ministry Toolkit, which has given our children's ministry team useful ideas to recruit, encourage, and train volunteers. The other one is the Professing Our Faith Toolkit, which basically encourage our leaders to be more proactive in terms of offering, planning pre-profession of faith classes, particularly for children and teens in our church. We continue to be encouraged and learn from these and other available materials from FFM. So for now, we thank you, FFM folks, for your diligent work. You guys rock.
I'm Lori Fieber from Nelson Avenue Community Church. What classes am I? BC Northwest. A little bit nervous. So all of those things, I can't even list all the ways that Faith Formation has influenced how we do meetings, how we experience worship services. Primarily, we've engaged through Sid and Leslie, as well as our regional catalyzer, Liz Tolkamp. Resources that we've used primarily through the website, Building Blocks of Faith, worship resources, and learning resources for our church's faith formation team. The posture of the Faith Formation Ministries has been one of coming alongside of our church where we are, rather than trying to overlay a program onto us, as was mentioned, and then trying to make us fit into it. The reps have acted in a mentoring posture, helping us discern the work of the Holy Spirit among us, and emphasizing ongoing discipleship. And I will say one of the most exciting results of Faith Formation Ministries is that we have a newly minted commissioned pastor of Faith Formation. Woo!
I'm Bob Trenton from Emmanuel Church in Orange City, Iowa, and I needed help. We had people that I was working with who needed to reconnect with Jesus, following Jesus. I didn't have resources, but I knew who to call. So I called my friend Sid. Actually, I sent him an email. He sent an email back, and he said, well, I have a couple of ideas, but I'm not sure. A couple days more, I see a couple more titles that he's adding to a list of resources. And I thought, well, this is great. Thank you very much, Sid. 5 days later, there's another list of books and resources and materials and strategies. And 2 weeks later after that, there's another list from Sid. He keeps adding to this. I have a whole list, a whole catalog, a library of resources now, and so do you. And it told me that not only was Sid willing to be a resource for our church, but that he was willing to go to his committee and to his folks and to ask that same question on my behalf and on your behalf to provide those resources and to share those ideas. Thank you.
Thank you, friends. And I know our team of 16 are primarily following this online right now, and it's a privilege to be here and represent them. It's also a privilege to pass on the baton. This is my final act right now as leader of Faith Formation Ministries, and I'm delighted that I will be succeeded by Dr. Christopher Schoon, and he'll have the last word in our presentation this afternoon. Welcome, Chris.
I cannot explain to you the amount of work Sid does behind the scenes, not just in the resource gathering, but in cultivating a vision for this ministry. He has been on this journey for a decade or more now, more than a decade, walking with the shepherding committee and then out of that into the formation of this ministry. And it is a privilege to follow him into this role as we shape Faith Formation Ministries and come alongside the local churches. Three things I want to highlight about vision and direction, where we're headed. One is we're going to take a look at how to strengthen what we're already offering. We've heard really positive feedback about toolkits, about some of the 10 ways documents we've put together. Certainly a lot of positive feedback about the listening posture and relational posture of our regional catalyzers and our resource folks, as well as the youth champions. And we want to continue to strengthen those ways of connecting with the local churches. We recognize, though, a need to diversify. Our denomination is quite diverse in multiple ways, certainly in terms of how do we get resources that fit within our ethnic communities and reflect what they are experiencing and how they've understood discipleship and formation. How do we begin working to get our resources available in multiple languages rather than simply in English at the moment? And then also begin asking questions about diversification in terms of moving from just our heads and a lot of print material into asking questions about what role does art and music play in the formation of discipleship? How do service projects play into our formation, and what types of resources can we help the churches gain in those areas? And finally, we want to expand. If you've been watching the toolkits and those resources, we have a lot on youth and children. We're developing stuff for the third of life, basically 60 years on and older. And we're starting to ask those questions. So what resources do we have available to help people who are in the middle of their vocational careers? How do we come alongside young moms who are at home and working with their kids? And what types of resources can we help them to continue growing in their faith at that stage? And we recognize that's not just on FFM, that involves a lot of collaborating with other ministries that are already in our denomination and learning from folks outside of our denomination about how they've been wrestling with these questions. So I'm looking forward to stepping into this space and to continuing the good work with the incredible team that we have together with FFM. Thank you for your time and support.
Thank you so much, Sid, Christine, Chris. Faith Formation, it's really catching on within our denomination. We love Faith Formation. It's growing. Within our own congregation, Hope Christian Reformed Church in Brantford, we've just declared an opening for pastor of Faith Formation. Before I came here, the chair of the calling committee said, in your spare time at Synod, maybe you could do a little bit of recruiting and just talk to as many people as you can about this and put out a feeler. So I think I've just done that. If we could, if all of you would send an email to the chair of our committee and say, he talked to us about it, that would be nice. That'd be appreciated. Anyway, now we have a chance to talk over coffee. So by all means, and thank you to Faith Formation one more time. Let's go for a break, and everybody's expected back in 20 minutes, 20 after. Yeah, Victor? Absolutely. Well done, well done. That's the rehearsal, because this comes up in Committee 5 to show appreciation to him one more time. So you've practiced. Be back in 20 minutes, please.